Welcome back to the GSNL Growing Through Failure. This is for lesson 2. I hope you enjoyed the first lesson and were able to get some understanding about growing through failures. Let's get right to it. Slide 1, we again list the 2 required memory verses. They're required because you'll need to write them out in entirety on the final test. Okay, so those 2 memory verses are Matthew 6:14 and 15 and Psalm 32:8 and 9. So let's go to the next verse, the verse page, and it says Matthew 6:14 through 15. For if you other when they your will forgive you. If you do forgive their sins, your will forgive sins. I hope that helps to get that verse in there. Key points. The title is First Steps to Recovery from Failure. The key biblical truth is I need God's help in taking the right steps to recover from failure. And the key verse is the same as one of the key verses for the whole course, and that's Psalm 32:8 and 9. The Lord says, I will guide you along the best pathway for your life. I will advise you and watch over you. Do not be like a senseless horse or mule that needs a bit and bridle to keep it under control. And the project here in the student material is chapter 2 in the student manual, and in the study guide, project 2, forgiveness and restitution. Okay, now this is the lesson warm-up. Let us quickly review what was in lesson 1. And I'll give you a little hint. This information might be on the final test. Okay, this is for review. Understanding my problems. It's from the student manual, page 11. The 4 parts of the iceberg are 1, surface problems, 2, surface causes, 3, root problems. And what are the 3 root problems? Everything goes down to those 3 root problems: bitterness, materialistic values, and immorality. And then root causes. Then the 3 types of failure taken from the student manual, pages 5 through 8, is 1, failure that is not sin, 2, failure that is sin, and 3, failure that leads to sin. Time to get into the meat of the lesson. We're talking about recovery here. The definition for recovery, the steps one takes to recover from their failure. Recovery also includes learning what steps to take so you don't commit the same failure again. The student manual does a great job of putting this together and helping to clarify the information. So we'll have a student read each paragraph on student manual page 17. Now we have 4 paragraphs that need to be read from the student manual, so I will put up the material and someone there will read it, will need to read it aloud. You don't need to stop the video for this. To summarize the rest of this section, recovery is not simply dealing with the damage caused by the failure. It also involves changing the way you live so you don't commit the same failure again next week, or a month from now, or 6 months from now. A failure in your life may indicate the need for major change. It may be more than what you can do on your own. You may need the help of other people to make these changes, and you will need God's help to make the needed changes in your life. So, recovery is not just going back to the place where you were before you failed. Recovery will involve growing to a completely different place. Recovery, radical recovery, involves being transformed by God's power. And lastly here, recovery, not only fixing what is broke, but recovering our right relationship with Jesus. We will deal with relapse later in lesson 4. Common ways of responding to failure. Quickly close your student manual. And here we will discuss this, the common ways of responding to failure. And this is a point of discussion. Take time and come up with a few ways people commonly respond to failure. Stop the video. Discussion. How do you respond to failure? It would be wonderful if someone would take time now and share one of their responses to failure. It could be positive or negative. Stop the video. Now go ahead and reopen your student manuals, pages 18 to 20. And you'll see why I wanted you to close them. Because the material lists out some common ways of responding to failure and gives some clarity on each point. Okay, let's go to number 1. Get rid of only the surface problem. Let's take a look again at the iceberg. When we deal with only surface problems, it will not be about permanent growth. Okay, let me repeat that. When we deal with just the surface problem, that does not activate permanent growth. 2, going along with our example of the iceberg, we can look at a simple cup of water and a simple ice cube. You can push the ice cube down repeatedly, but sooner or later, it will pop right back up. Just like problems, when we try to push down the issue, it will explode back to the top. 3, don't hide anything, which is the opposite of suppressing. Some people go in the opposite direction and talk about their problems all the time. Some things do need to be kept between you and God, so you don't need to share your issues with everybody. Next, or number 4, run away from problems. This is completely self-explanatory. 5, ignore the problem. This technique of dealing with failures do not work good at all. Imagine if a captain ignores an iceberg and hoped it would not affect his ship. You'd have a big problem all over again, Titanic. 6, make excuses and justify the problem. Not accepting a problem or not taking responsibility is another bad idea. This individual easily rationalizes mistakes instead of correcting them. And 7, respond to failure God's way. We can read many stories in the Bible about people responding horribly to failure. In this course, we will further discuss biblical ways to handle failure. God wants us to be free, so he usually starts at the bottom of an iceberg, but he waits for the right timing because he's a gentleman. He doesn't go in there and hack at our issues. He wants to work with us to resolve the issue so that we can be free for freedom's sake. What should I do when I fail? You see, recovery is the goal. We should not anticipate to never fail because that's setting us up for more failure and keeps us from dealing with the issues that cause us to trip up. It is part of growing. So the best course of action is to remember that recovery is where all of us are heading. We're all dealing with our issues and we want to be free. Because then once we deal with our issues, we can be the person God created us to be. And we can experience the full potential of who God created us to be. I'm not saying go ahead and make yourself fail so then you can grow. No, do your best to follow after God every day, to submit yourself to Him and apply His word to your life. But realize there may be times when you fail. And here we have some steps that you can go through. 1, I should admit that I was wrong. 2, I should ask God to forgive me. First, make it right with Him. 3, I must forgive myself. 4, I must make a decision to stop sinning. 5, ask forgiveness of those who were offended. 6, find the cause of the failure. 7, look for God's way out of my failure. 8, let others tell me about my problems. And 9, keep growing. In your student manual, these points they give further clarity again on these points. So I just want to encourage you to read through the material and make sure you understand these. You might even want to write these out somewhere on an index card so that you know what to do in the event that you fail. Let's take a look at some biblical examples. The task that you are given now is to gather into smaller groups and take one of these stories. If there's not enough to cover, enough students there to cover all of these stories, go ahead and select the one that you would like to cover. We have a few examples here. Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, Cain's conflict with God and his brother, not God's brother, Cain's brother. King Saul tries to cover up his failure. David's sin with Bathsheba. Peter denying Christ. And the prodigal son. Forgiveness and restitution. Have you ever clumsily blurted out asking forgiveness? My hope of this course is to give you tools to handle future conversations that will be asking for forgiveness. Usually what hinders me from asking for forgiveness is I'm afraid the person's going to come back at me and call me names and say all kinds of mean things. But that's not my responsibility. My responsibility is to ask for forgiveness. So let's take a closer look at 2 issues which have a key part in our response to failure: forgiveness and restitution. First, what is restitution? It is restoring something, putting it back into a functional state. We want to restore relationships, restore successful attitudes and behaviors, and we want to see positive growth come out of forgiveness and restitution. It is very important to go to the person you offended with your failure. There will be all kinds of excuses and reasons not to go to someone with your apology. But different types of situations will be helped by asking the person to forgive you. But know that some failures do not involve anyone but you and God. Too often, I have heard people ask for forgiveness, which was really more of a judgment, and that didn't feel good. So before I ask for forgiveness, I have to consider some things. One, admit to myself and God that I was wrong. B, know clearly what I did that was wrong. And C, plan what I will say when I talk to this person. You may have already completed Project 2, Question 6. If you have, would you please share your answer with the group? If someone is willing to share what they wrote, please stop the video and do so now. There are wrong ways to ask forgiveness. Your student manual again lists these wrong ways really well and brings so much clarity. Depending on how you ask for forgiveness, someone can determine if you're actually sincere. Take turns reading the paragraph, starting with A. Practice the course memory verse. Matthew 6:14 and 15. For you, other, when they, you, your will forgive you. But if you do, your will not sins. It's time to focus in on the right way to ask forgiveness. And really, this is very simple. It only has two parts. You start with, I was wrong in blank. Will you forgive me? When you begin with, I was wrong, it is clear that you understand your part in the situation. Remember, there's always two parts to every story, okay? Two sides of a coin, you know? And so no matter how much you may feel like you were wronged, you had a part to play in it too. So let's look at that. Part 1. Confess what you did wrong. This is a good idea to identify the inner attitude and root problems, not simply the surface problem. When you confess what you did wrong and you just deal with the top surface, remember the common reasons or responses to failure. One of them is to ignore the problem or just deal with the surface problem. Then it will keep happening. I know I have been guilty in my life to excuse asking somebody to forgive me because I'll say, oh, what does it matter? They're just going to do, they're going to do the same thing to me again. Why should I ask forgiveness because I got mad? I was justified in how I responded. But that's not really asking for forgiveness. I want to ask forgiveness and clean off that slate. I don't want anybody to have something to hold against me. I want, when I stand before the throne of God, to be able to confidently know He'll forgive me of my sins, because I have forgiven people of their sins and I have asked for forgiveness. The second part of asking for forgiveness is, will you forgive me? You see, if you think of a of a chalkboard, and will you forgive me is the action of removing those words from the chalkboard. Will you forgive me? And waiting for their response. When you ask this question, be prepared for a time, a break. There might be silence, but do not rush the moment. You have to allow the person time to hear your response, to hear your request, and then really forgive you, to release that. And then if you can, in your mind, imagine your failure up on the chalkboard, and that giving that person time to go and wipe that off of the chalkboard. That is, will you forgive me? Now we have a task. We'll do a little role play. We'll select two men to respond in incorrect ways in asking for forgiveness. Let the two men have a moment to select the option they want to play out, and then the remaining students guess which incorrect method of asking for forgiveness that the men are role playing. Stop the video. What about forgiving those who offend you? It is difficult to confess a failure and work on recovery in any situation. With great mercy and grace, we must be willing to forgive others. We know how difficult it is to ask for forgiveness, so be quick to also forgive. But don't dismiss a request. Oh, yeah, no problem. And then you still hold it in your heart. When someone is asking forgiveness, you need to say, I forgive you. Someone is coming to terms with their failure and offense against you. So make sure that you take that chalk eraser and erase their offense on that chalkboard. Proverbs 17:9 from the New Living Translation. Love prospers when a fault is forgiven, but dwelling on it separates close friends. Making restitution. This is a big concept, and we are only touching lightly on the topic here in this material. There are stories around of successful restitution and unsuccessful ones. So I'll share a story of my own experience. Many years ago, I had left my bike out at Kenny's parents' house. It was fun to ride a bike out there as opposed to riding in San Francisco with all the hills. Then one day, my sister-in-law and brother-in-law decided to ride the bike. While they were having a great time, they ended up crashing my bike so bad that it bent the front wheel and the axle was beyond repair. However, they never told me that they ruined the bike. They never asked for forgiveness. They never repaired it or even attempted toward recovery or restitution. Sad to say, I went forward in our relationship with this offense clouding my trust of them. Although I prefer to not hold a grudge, obviously I clearly remembered what happened. Now, the Bible has given us a pattern for restitution. God can turn any failure into something good if we follow His ways. Let's have a discussion on this matter. Gather into 3 groups and take one of the 3 biblical examples listed on page 30 of your student manual. That's Matthew 5:23 through 24, Luke 19:1 through 10, and Galatians 6:1 through 20. I want you to discuss who is in the story, who is offended, who is doing the offense, how did they come to terms with their failure, what was exactly said to ask for forgiveness, and what was the response to the confession. What can you learn from this story, and what form of restitution was made? Stop the video. Now that you've returned to the large group, have a representative share from each group what you learned about the stories so we all can benefit. Stop the video. What does the Bible say about restitution? Leviticus 6, 2 through 5 covers other situations in which the stolen property is restored, plus 1/5 of the value. Also of note in this passage, the restitution was made to the owner of the property, not the government or any other third party, and the compensation was to be accompanied by a guilt offering to the Lord. The Mosaic Law then protected victims of theft, extortion, fraud, and negligence by requiring the offending parties to make restitution. The amount of the remuneration varied anywhere from 100 to 500% of the loss. The restitution was to be made on the same day that the guilty one brought his sacrifice before the Lord, which implies that making amends with one's neighbor is just as important as making peace with God. Some of you may have stolen. You may have lied about having a property that was lost and kept it. You may have cheated people. Think about that now as I read Leviticus chapter 6, verses 2 through 5. If anyone sins and is unfaithful to the Lord by deceiving a neighbor about something entrusted to them or left in their care, or about something stolen, or if they cheat their neighbor, or if they find lost property and lie about it, or if they swear falsely about any such sin that people may commit, when they sin in any of these ways and realize their guilt, they must return what they have stolen or taken by extortion, or what was entrusted to them, or the lost property they found, or whatever it was they swore falsely about. They must make restitution in full. Add 1/5 of the value to it and give it all to the owner on the day they present their guilt offering. Wait a minute, let me read that again. Kind of stumbled a little bit. Or whatever it was they swore falsely about, they must make restitution in full. Add 1/5 of the value to it and give it all to the owner on the day they present their guilt offering to the Lord. Now, in relation to the illustration I shared, so I should have been given back a new bike, not just given back the broken one. I should have been given back the bike fixed plus extra money, maybe to buy a light for my bike or a basket for my bike, to show that I was really sorry. And that would have been clearing that slate clean to where that offense wasn't affecting my relationship with these people down the road. Do not take these points of restitution lightly. Our course memory verse testifies to the importance of asking for forgiveness from our neighbor and from God. So let's list the steps in restitution. Make a commitment with God. B, restore your relationship with the person you offended. C, make material restoration for what you stole or destroyed. Character quality benefits of making restitution. Restitution is often a painful experience, and it takes a lot of courage to follow God's pattern. This type of a situation also offers the new Christian opportunities to develop positive inward character qualities. Discuss some of the different qualities they can develop in these types of situation. I'll list the ones here listed in your book. A, inner peace. B, it may cause you hardship. C, it may convince people you are a Christian. D, you may be completely pardoned. So at this point, discuss the results of making restitution and the character qualities that are developed as a result. Stop the video. Do you see the importance of memorizing this particular verse? Let's go over it one more time. For you, other, when they, you, your, will forgive you. But if you do their, your, will not. I hope you've benefited from this course, this lesson, and because there's still more for us to learn. But our personal application for GSNL 6 Lesson 2 is in the student manual, pages 20 through 25, are the first steps that should be taken when you fail. 1, identify a particular failure that you will still need to deal with in your life. And then 2, pick 1 or 2 steps that will be needed to apply to that failure. God bless you. We'll see you for Lesson 3.